very fortunate tonight as a return engagement to have Mr. Feldbush with us. He's going to talk about the Goldtones tonight, which I believe started in 1959, correct? Okay.
Right.
And I was so impressed at his last presentation about the marching band. His enthusiasm has never waned for the music of Cuyahoga Falls. We are very, very fortunate to have had him and have him a part of this community, and his passion remains so strong. So, without further ado, Mr. Feldbush.
Appreciate it. Good evening. I see a lot of friendly faces. I hope friendly. I see quite a few Goldtones. Oh, that's much better. Yeah. Much better. Somebody asked me, oh, you don't need to dress up. And usually when I was teaching, this would last about the first period. And then the tie would go, and then we get down to teaching music. But I figured I'd better dress up a little bit tonight. I'd like to introduce, first of all, my wife back here, Barbra. And one of my three daughters, Laura, is back here. Laura. And one of my granddaughters, Ashley, back there. Have I missed any other... I don't think. I do want to thank you for coming. The Goldtones is, of course, something very dear to my heart because it was something that I had a passion for. When I first came to Cuyahoga Falls in 1959, they asked me to do two things. The first thing was eventually take over the marching band and elevate it. And the second thing was to start, and they didn't know what to call it. They called it a big band when I went in to talk to the superintendent. He didn't know what a big band was. They didn't want to call it a jazz ensemble because in Cuyahoga Falls in 1959, jazz was not a good word, okay? They didn't want to call it exactly a dance band either. So they really didn't know what to call it. So they took a name that came actually from Berkeley School of Music, okay? A stage band. And that's what they called it. So when we put out the word that we were going to have a stage band, there were some problems because the students had no idea what a stage band was. That was further from their mind. There you go, yeah. They were listening to things like what? Bill Haley and the Comets? Fats Waller, that sort of thing. Big band was the furthest thing from their mind. They had no idea what it was. There weren't many big bands around anymore. You had Glenn Miller that was still touring, sort of. Tommy Dorsey, sometimes. Basie had a small band then. The big band wasn't put back together yet. And you had a couple of the Armed Forces bands. You had the Airmen of Note. You had the Commodores and the Marine Band. But those bands didn't come to Cuyahoga Falls. They didn't come to even Akron. There was no E.J. Thomas. There was no Civic Theater. That was still Lowe's, a movie theater. They had no chance to see a big band. The nearest place was what? Myers Lake in Canton. And very few of the students would go down to Myers Lake to see a band. So it was a bit of a problem to try and impress on them or get them to know what a big band was. And I had to recruit the first band. And, oh, he's got a picture of it here. Maybe turn the lights down a little bit on that so they can see it. This was quite an aggregation. Whoop. I'll get
let me go
here.
back to it.
Can you
One sec.
sharpen it up any at all?
Not really, because I had to get this projector at the last moment.
There we go. That's the one I'm thinking. This was the first band. Now you notice there's only 3 trumpets, and 3 trombones, 5 saxes, sort of. One of them was a clarinet player. One of the trombones, Niels Christensen, right here, was actually a euphonium player that I drafted. Michalik, Dan, played piano. He ended up at Sill as a teacher. Classically trained. We were lucky. We had an orchestra at Cuyahoga Falls. They don't have string program anymore. I'm sad about that. We had a string program for a long time, and a very good one. So I did have an acoustical bass player. But guess what? Back then, no pickups. He had to just pluck real hard. There were no pickups back then. So this was the first band. And when I mentioned we were going to play some swing music, they had no idea what swing music was. The first thing I had to do was work with this rhythm section, because that's the heartbeat of a big band. And to teach them that this guy is the timekeeper and not the reeds took a while. Because in most bands, the conductor directs the winds, and the percussion section goes with the conductor. In a big band, the rhythm section controls time. This is the key. And to get them to understand that took quite a while. I had a little problem with it, so I went to see a friend. His name was Frank Zucco. And he and his brother Ray started a music store in town called Falls Music Center. It started down on Front Street, but then they moved up the Portage Trail. And Frank and his brother had been in big bands. Frank was a drummer. And he came in and helped me teach Mostelner, the drummer, how to play in a big band, what a backbeat was, and how to keep time. Mostelner was a very fine mallet player, really good mallet player. Played xylophone very well, did solos in contests, did very well, but he had no idea about a drum set. We had to put one together. We used a marching band bass drum with a pedal, a cymbal on a stand from concert band, and a snare drum out of the concert band. That was our drum set. So it took a little time, but that first year mainly was get help for anybody that would help me. I would call people, bring in people that knew about big bands, ask for their help in trying to put it together. And all through my career, I always brought people in. Most of you would know them. I brought people in like Milt Guthrie to work with the saxes. I brought Mike Ruth in, who worked with the trumpet section. Dick Pippard, who worked with the trombone section. I would always bring people in that knew what the big bands were all about to help me get this band started. Now the first year was mainly just establishing the style of the band. But one big problem: no CDs, no cassettes, no material of any kind. Today, you want to play a big band chart, you go and you order it, you get a big band chart. There wasn't any such thing in '59. Nobody published big band charts. The only thing we had back then was something called stocks. Some of you might have played stocks. They were put out by men like Skip Martin was one of them, and Art Dedrick. And they would follow a formula to make these arrangements that could be played by any size band. And they were always the same. Introduction was 4 measures long, 2 choruses. First chorus, first 16 bars was brass, the bridge was saxes, last 8 was brass. That was on the top stave. Bottom stave the second time through, saxes had the first 16, brass had the bridge, saxes had the last 8. Then normally they go into a modulation and either a trombone chorus, a string chorus, because yes, they were written for strings as well, or a vocal chorus. And they were pretty much square. They were whatever was popular at that time. Whether it was rock and roll, whether it was country western, whatever it was, that's what they wrote. They were cheap, 50 cents, 75 cents for the arrangement. And that's all that was available. The first charts, and those were stocks, were transcriptions. We were able to get a transcription of String of Pearls. We were able to get a transcription of Moonlight Serenade. They were not very good transcriptions. So mostly that first year, I had to do a lot of writing for this group. And I was fortunate at being able to do transcriptions myself and write some arrangements for them. They seemed to like it. We played for the school a couple times, and even the students seemed to think it was worthwhile. You notice we did not have a vocalist then. That came in 61, that we added the vocalist. But it went pretty well. And about in May of that first year, that would have been in 60, the students came to me and they said, you know, we should have our own concert. Okay. We need a name. Okay. How do you want to select it? Why don't we all put a name in a hat and we'll pick one? That's where the Goldtones came from. Somebody came up with that name and they voted and Goldtones won. I picked the name Musical Horizons because I told them I would find them a concert. Now at that time, we picked May because the state contest was usually the last week in April or at the latest the first week in May. And whenever the state contest was, the next week the choir had their contest or concert, and I usually got the third week. I like to have 2 weeks between the choir concert and mine so that we could use the stage. So anyhow, they said they wanted to have a concert, and I said, great, one big problem, no stage. If you knew much about the old high school, we had an auditorium, but it was so small and the stage was so small, we'd had trouble getting that group on it. It was just way too small, no room. So we did all our concerts, and the first Musical Horizons was at Sill. If you know that gym over there, there's a pretty good sized stage on one side of the gym. Now the concert band never used the stage. They set up down on the gym floor and we put chairs for the audience. But for the stage show, for the Goldtones, I used the stage. Okay? That first one was, well, let me put it this way. It lasted, I think, 25 minutes. Because we were able to learn that first year in 1961 about 3 tunes that were decent. And I had a vocalist by then. I think she did 1 or 2. And we had the majorettes dance, I think 1. That was the whole show. But for that show, I saw a need to have a theme. And it was right after that first show that I started working on a theme for the Goldtones. Most people now don't know we had a theme at one time. But it's in the library, or was in the library up there. And then I wrote what we called bows music. Music that you use to take acts on and off. Okay? Before and after. The theme was a tune called I Won't Cry Anymore. I don't know whether anybody knows that anymore, but that was the name of the theme. What was that? I didn't hear.
So we opened the show with that.
Yes, we opened the show. Not the first one, and not the second one. We actually opened the show with the third one in '63. The first 2 were at Sill. Now, it was during 1962 that the first part of the new high school was built. They built the offices, the cafeteria, and the rooms above the offices. They were planning the gym, the auditorium, band and choir room. That was still on blueprints, okay? They were planning it. We knew in '62 that that auditorium would be opening, and I wanted a big splash for 1963. That was a big year for the Goldtones. So I contacted a good friend of mine by the name of, many of you know him, Ron Simon, who was the art instructor. And he had helped me with some posters in '61 and '62. And I said, Ron, we got this beautiful stage. We knew what the dimensions were going to be. I said, I want you to plan me a set. You design it, I'll get it built. I had a friend of mine who was a shop teacher and manager of the auditorium, Stan Hott. Anybody remember Stan Hott? Stan said, no problem, I'll build that thing. So he and several of the parents, with the help of, believe it or not, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, we got the materials to build that first set that he designed. They built a framework out of 2x4s and stretched plastic, white plastic, over the framework, put the stage lights behind it so they could turn that plastic any color they wanted. And that's when it started with all the lighting that we used to do on musical risings. It was in 1963. And that set was pretty what do I want to say? Pretty great for that time period. People didn't believe what it looked like. By the 1963, the show was up to about hour and 15 minutes maybe, something like that. I had added quite a bit to it. Any act, anybody who could do anything. Tap dance, xylophone, guitar, anything you can name, I would add. If you had some talent, I'm going to put it on the show. Because I learned one very important thing from somebody I had met inadvertently. When I was in the Navy, our drummer was a man by the name of Jack Immel. And Jack Immel went with Lawrence Welk. And I learned from Jack and Lawrence Welk, if you want a crowd, you've got to play the music that the people are going to want. Not what the musicians want to play, what the people want to hear. And I always remembered that. So I would make sure to have a little of this, make sure I got something in there for the older folks, something they knew, something for the kids, keeping in mind to try and keep everybody involved. And in '63 is when I started to get more of the students involved. I drafted anybody who was interested to go backstage and work props, pull curtains, sell tickets, usher, do anything I could think of to get more people involved in the show. Because I felt that's important to give the students an audience to listen. And we built it up, and that first year in '63, we had a full house at the high school. No seats, jammed. By '65, we added a second night. We went to Friday and Saturday. Now the second night was never completely full, but about 3/4. But again, it was because of the type of thing that we used to bring in people. I even went so far one year, we had a major ed advisor who happened to be a teacher in an elementary. And I had a crazy idea for the second half of the show. Oh, by the way, we divided the show. First half was the band, and I would play any, what you might call, quote, jazz charts then, okay? But things that the kids would like to play. Maynard Ferguson charts, whatever. Buddy Rich charts. Second half, I would do something to feature something in particular. And the year I'm thinking of, we did a Disney salute. Okay? So in one of the numbers we were doing, I needed a bunch of students, kids. She brought her whole class. 30 kids on stage. Now, you think about it, you get 30 little kids involved, how many people is that going to bring in? Yeah. That's what you're thinking about. Okay? You want a successful show, use a little showbiz. And I learned that when I was quite young, when I started playing in clubs. Okay? You want to bring people in, play what they want to hear. Doesn't matter what you want, play what the audience wants. Then you're going to get people there. Now, 63 was also important in that that was the first year we made an album. And I had contacted a fellow in Cleveland. I wish I could remember the name of that company. Maybe one of you know. But
Century.
that wasn't the first name. That was the second name. There was another company that did the first one. That isn't the first one, is it?
No, it's 65.
Yeah, that's 65. The first one that was called a different name, and I've forgotten his name. He ran it for about 2 years and then got out, sold the company, and went down south someplace. And then it finally turned into Century. But anyhow, he had what you would call a minibus, you know, like a Volkswagen, and he turned that into a studio. He had everything in that minibus, and he drove it up to the high school on the east side of the auditorium, you know, where the doors are there, go into the auditorium. Drove the minibus right up onto the sidewalk, ran his cables in through the doors, down the hall where the dressing rooms were, and up onto the stage. And put up the mics that we needed to record. Well, the first recording, he came to me and he said, now, usually what I do for most high school groups is I just put 2 mics up out in the audience someplace and get an overall picture of what the band sounds. And really it masks a lot of the problems, if there are any, and gives you just a nice overall sound. He said, the other way, if you got the guts, I'm going to put 3 mics in each section. Mic on the piano, a mic on the bass player, 2 mics on the drummer, and it's up to them to perform. And I said, let's make them do it. So we started to do it that way. Now, it took more time. We would do it the Saturday after Musical Horizons. And the kids would come back and we would spend all day in the auditorium on the stage making that recording. It may take a lot of takes for each one just to get those recordings, because you're bound to have mistakes. And this guy was, boy, his name's starting to come back. I almost had it there. He had ears, and he had a microphone in his little van. And when he heard something, he'd tap on that mic, and it'd sound like an explosion down the stage. He'd say, "The second trombone player is flat." He had that kind of ears. Dick Woolley. I knew the name would come back. Dick Woolley. And so I learned very quickly, and the band learned very quickly, that you better know what you're doing, because they're going to hear it, okay? So that was the first one. We have not been able to find that one, right?
No, the earliest record I've been able to locate is 1965.
65. You've got a little of that, don't you?
Yes.
Play a little of that for me. Up a little more. Turn it up. A little more.
That is a very clear record. Bob, that's it. Brandon Mark 6, Harry. That's that Brandon Mark 6 Harry in there.
Right, right, I remember that. Okay, that was, give him an idea of the first one. But it caught on pretty well, and we sold enough records to help finance the next year's show. Because each year we went into a little more detail as far as the set was concerned, making it a little more fancy, if you want to say that. Now, I would like some help. He's helped over here, and that's wonderful. If you have a question or you have a comment, please make it as we go along. Because I forget dates, I forget names. Now, like Wooly, he finally came back, but it took a while. At my age, you got to stir it up a little bit.
Hey, that first picture, was that you in the back left?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
That was me,
It wasn't
believe it
shot
or not.
really see- oh, remember.
I was that young at one time.
Who's
But,
the superintendent that hired you, Fred Bodie?
Bodie, Fred
Fred Bodie.
Bodie, he's the one who hired me. Yeah. He was a funny guy. When I went in to see Fred, well, I'll tell you that story. Maybe I told it last year, I don't know. I had promised Roy Reynolds, I had been in to see him the year before, 1958, because, long story, I ended up teaching a band at Kent State University High School. The band director there, shall we say, got sick. And I ended up taking the band over. It was supposed to be my student teaching. I never got student teaching. He got sick the first week of school. So I took over and taught that semester and stayed the rest of the year. Roy came to hear the band and I guess liked what he heard, and he wanted me to apply for this job at Cuyahoga Falls. And I said, well, you got to understand, back then, I wish it was that way now, there were 3 jobs for every teacher that graduated. There was all kind of work. Because why? The baby boom. Schools starting to explode. And so I had an offer, 2 serious ones. One was Copley, and the other one was Cuyahoga Falls. I went to Copley first, did my talking to the superintendent. He said, I'm offering you a job right now. I said, I'm sorry, I can't take it. I promised Cuyahoga Falls I would interview. So I went over to Cuyahoga Falls, and Fred Bodie, he's sitting in that, well, you understand the Board of Education was nothing but a house. Little house there on 4th Street, or Stowe Street. About where, you know where the house is for the guard, the parking lot? That's about where it's at. I went in to his inn, and there was 1 secretary, I think maybe 2 other ladies working. That was the whole Board of Education. That was it. There wasn't the big one like we have now. It was maybe 10, 12 people, the most. But I go into his office, and he's sitting in his chair with his feet up on the desk. And he kind of looks at me, and he goes, you want to teach here? And I said, I think so. He said, tell me about yourself. So I told him what I felt education should be. And I've always worked that way. To me, education, no matter what your field is, you're trying to prepare that person to be a successful part of the society or community. I don't care whether they're a player or not. That would be a plus. But you want to make them a good member of society. So you want to teach them using your discipline, whatever it takes. And as some of you know, I was not easy on anybody. If they didn't do what I think they should do, they heard about it. I could not do that today. Today you have to sort of, well now, we'll talk to you about that. That's never been me, okay? I've never operated that way. But anyhow, I gave him my philosophy of education, and he said, well, I think I'd like you to start. And I said, well, I just got an offer from Copley. He said, I don't care what it is, we want you here. He said, I want you to do 2 things. One is, take over the marching band. Roy wants to do just the concert band. And I said, Okay. The second thing is, start this big band thing. He had no idea what it was. I said, okay. And that's how it got started. Okay. It was kind of wild. But back then, things were different. You had no CDs, no cassettes. All you had was big vinyl records. Nobody sent you anything to listen to pick out arrangements. You had to go and get them. We would drive all the way to Pittsburgh to Volkwine's music store to see what was available. In 59, nothing. Or, yeah, 59, nothing, 60, nothing, 61. Finally, by 63, another big thing that happened that year, the first published big band arrangements came out. Some of the first were String of Pearls. Okay? Laura was another one, a ballad. I'm trying to think if there, oh, I know, Sammy Nestico's first, Queen Bee. That was his first chart he wrote. And he wrote it for the Airmen of Note in Washington, D.C. Sammy had been a middle school band director in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he was a great writer, could arrange. So he got a job with a local radio and television station. And he did such good work that he found out he could audition for the Air Force. Audition was taken in as an arranger and trombone player for the Airmen of Note. And he started out just as an arranger, then gradually took over as director. The first arrangement he wrote for them was Queen Bee. He wrote two versions. One version was for the Airmen of Note, and the other version was watered down a little bit. It was for high school jazz ensembles. Guess which one I bought?
It's a good one.
You got it. The Airmen of Note. And it was a wonderful arrangement. And most of you know by now, Sammy Nestico has written so much for so many people. Later on in our career, of course, as you know, we got a chance to play and be with Sammy. I knew him first through Rusty Higgins, because Rusty Higgins knew him out in L.A. And when my wife and I went out there to visit, Rusty called him on the phone. And I talked to him there a little bit. And then later on, and I forget the date, I've got it on my notes here. We'll have to have lights later on so I make sure I haven't forgotten anything. We had a chance to play with Sammy. So 63, first recording, auditorium comes into being, start all the big shows. This is a strange one. No college jazz ensembles. There was no Akron U, there was no Kent State, there was no Youngstown. There was a very elementary one at Ohio State, run by a student by the name of Lad McIntosh. Kent finally, in 1968, had a group, a big band that was not sanctioned by the college. It was after school, run by a piano player, which a lot of you have heard of, Bill Dobbins. Okay? He ran the band. But it was not sanctioned, was not a curriculum band. When I first went to Kent State, I was a saxophone player. Okay? I played very little clarinet, a little, enough to double in clubs. But I go in and I audition, and the guy goes, yeah, you're a good player. We'll take you. But you can't play saxophone. I said, I'm a saxophone player. He said, that's not a legitimate instrument. You're going to have to be a clarinet player. Okay? So I studied clarinet my first 2 years with Alfred Zetzer out of Cleveland Symphony. And that's the way most of the jazz programs were at that time. They were either held on by students on their own after school. At Kent, they used to get the custodian to let them in so they could rehearse. It was strange. Youngstown didn't get started until later in the 60s when a man by the name of Tony Leonardi came. And he was a bass player off the Woody Herman band. And when he got to Youngstown, it exploded. Okay? And you had men in 63 starting to write like, let me think. Rayburn Wright from Eastman School of Music. Some of you may have played some of his arrangements. Big name. John Laporta from Berkeley School of Music. He was starting to write at that time. Yep. So gradually, over the next 2-3 years, things started to happen. But it's hard for today's students to understand there was no Jamie Abersol, there was no play-along records, there was no jazz books, there was no jazz history books, there was nothing. It didn't start until about 63, 64 that those things came out. And we got some help. Other than that, you had to write your own and do your own things. I'm going to need some light so I can check and see where I'm at. Where did he go? Where is he at? All right, here we go. I'm going to need a sip of water here. Let's see if I hit everything. What was the name of the choir director before Peter Ulrich?
Long?
Josie Long.
Long.
Well, as I told you, I like to add extra groups for musical horizons. And Josephine Long did not believe in jazz or anything popular at all. She was strictly classical, that was it, okay? When Peter Ulrich came up to high school, he wanted that kind of a program. So he put together the group M&Ms, Melody Men, Melodettes, okay? Right away I say, oh boy, here we go, I gotta grab that group. So I went to Pete and I said, Pete, I'd like you to be on Musical Horizons. You have a couple numbers that the Melody Men, Melodettes could do together. Give me the piano music and I'll write an arrangement for the band. And that's the way they got started. They would do one number in the first half and one number in the second half. The first year, we put them on stage on a riser, or I think it was 2 risers. But it didn't work because I wanted that show to keep going. As you know, no break. Keep it moving. And it took too much time. So we put the risers in the pit, and they would get up on the risers in the pit, and I didn't need to wait. Kept the show moving. A fellow that helped me do that a lot was our announcer, Dean Sterling. God bless him. He's gone, but he was wonderful. He was with me a lot of years, along with Roy Hart's back here. And Roy and Dean and Dick Swinehart were the big 3 that helped me with those shows a lot, okay? Roy was usually back on the sound council, helping back there. Dick Swinehart was backstage with all these students running all the equipment on and off. You know, if you brought out a singer and she wasn't quite sure of the words, you might want to put a music stand out there or something. Or we would have little props. Stan would build props. I might have a duet, boy and a girl, okay? And we'd put a bench out there with a little fake tree behind them or something. You know, whatever it took to dress up the stage. But I had so much help in those years. The Goldtones would have been nothing without all the people in Cuyahoga Falls and the students that helped so much to do everything. I could not have done it myself at all. Now somebody asked me how long the shows were and how we worked that. Generally, 2 halves. First half about 10 or 11 numbers. Second half about 8, 9. Okay, second half a little shorter. Intermission in between. What did we want to do at intermission? Go out to the lobby and see the art show. That's another way I got more people in there. Ron Simon had all of his students do artwork, and they all put them out in the lobby. Now guess who came to see the artwork? Okay? Whatever it takes, you get yourself an audience. And that brought him in also. And he loved it because it gave his students a chance to do something. So it made the show even more popular. Generally, I would start with the Goldtones. First thing was a rhythm section. I always got them first. Usually start them right at the end of football season, maybe even before it was quite over, just to make sure the rhythm section was solid. Okay? Then, in later years, we had to have auditions. The first band you saw, I had to beg, borrow, and steal them. Okay? I'd take anybody that could walk. But by about the second, maybe the third year, kids were interested enough that they wanted to do it and they wanted to audition. I was talking to Tom Phelan the other night about it, because I wanted to ask him about dates to get straight in my mind. And he said, well, I didn't get in until 65. He said, I wanted in 63, but I couldn't get in. I auditioned, but couldn't make it. So it gives you an idea. He had to wait till 65 to get in. Okay? Now, I looked at the Goldtones from two aspects. One, I've already told you, I wanted to help them become, in my mind, the best citizens that they could become. But the second thing was more important to my heart. I wanted them, if they wanted to become a professional player. If they wanted to do it, I wanted to make it possible for them to learn what they were going to need to know to be a professional player. So that's, the whole program was gauged on that. They'll tell you on the night of the show, they never saw me until the show started. Isn't that right? I showed up 5 minutes before the show started. It was their job to tune, their job to warm up. You go in a pro band, nobody's going to warm you up or tune you. That's your job. So it was their job to do that. I didn't go in and play whole notes with them or scales or anything else. They had to do it themselves. That was the first thing. Second thing was they had to learn to read. They had to learn to read. About boy, help me with these dates. 1968, I believe, was the first year that several things happened. Number one, the band parents decided they wanted an adult dance. Okay? So they made arrangements to get the high school auditorium. They put up tables all along, and at one end they put up risers for me. And by that time we had 3 jazz ensembles. We had the Goldtones, we had the feeder band, the dance band, and believe it or not, we had an all-girl jazz ensemble. Now, a lot of people didn't know about that. It didn't last too long, but I think it was in 1967, several of them came to me and they go, hey, what is this? There's no girls in the Goldtones. I said, hey, you can audition. No, we don't, we want our own band. Okay. Now, trying to get the right instrumentation was a problem. I didn't have enough saxophone players, so I had to get somebody who played clarinet and teach them how to play tenor. All right, we had 3 saxes. The 2 trumpets were not a problem. The trombone wasn't a problem. Piano wasn't a problem. Drums wasn't a big problem, but string bass, I had no girls in the orchestra that played string bass. The shortest girl in the band, whose dad happened to be a science teacher there, Watson. Oh, Linda Watson. Her dad was a science teacher. She volunteered. She was not this high to play string bass. And by golly, she learned how to play it. And on that adult dance, the girls' band went first, and they learned enough to play about 40 minutes, I think. Then we took a little break. Then the dance band came out, and they played probably 45 minutes. We took a little break, and the Goldtones came out. Now, one of the reasons I mention that is this. We did not practice the dance music. I had a dance book. And I would pass that out at the dances. Here it is, guys. Open it up. Number 2, pick it out, look it over, play. You learn to read by doing it. That was another thing in my mind. Get them ready. When they go out and they want to play professionally, they better be able to read. And the only way you learn is by doing it. Now, once in a while, they're going to miss a note. They're going to miss a rhythm. But by golly, they learn real quick. No, we didn't practice it. As soon as the dance was over, fold it up, put it back in the cupboard. Next time we had to play a dance, we opened it up. We practiced everything else. Now, in '68, another thing happened. I had an orchestra, and I happened to be directing it at that time. And it hit me, wouldn't that be nice on some of those vocals to have a string section behind? So we added strings to the Goldtones. I think you either have a photograph or recording. What is it?
Recording.
Recording. Okay, play it.
How long did you use pitchforks?
Only about 2-3 years.
Would you like to ride in my beautiful balloon? Would you like to glide in my beautiful balloon? We could float along the stars together, you and I. We could fly.
You have trouble hearing us, there are strings in there. Okay, that's enough. But the problem with strings were, and I didn't use them too often, even good string players, if you don't have really good ones, pitch problems. Big time pitch problems. Okay? I tried to do it once, add strings to Swing Machine, a band that I had a few years ago. And they were semi-professional players. And it didn't work. Their pitch just wasn't good enough. The other problem is, what keys are string players used to playing in? G, D, A, and E. Do stage bands play in the key of E? No. Or A? D? Rarely. That puts a saxophone player in the key of B. So you have a problem. They're not used to playing in flat keys. So again, pitch problems. Okay? So I didn't use them very often. I did a violin solo a couple times because I had some really good violin players. Now, am I missing any recordings?
No, you've got them all up to this point.
Hey, good, good. Keep me going in the right direction here. Any questions yet before I go on? Oh, come on, somebody's got.
Were your first vocalists men or were they women with the Goldtones?
Was always women. Always women. Now, I did use some men, but not, they didn't audition. I just found a boy in the choir that was particularly good, or knew of someone who was particularly good, and brought them on to do duet with our vocals. So I did that several times. And I'm trying to remember, I had one drummer, gosh, I wish I could remember his name, who loved Jerry Lewis. You remember when Jerry Lewis did the mouthing, the bassy recording? I forget what it was. But anyhow, he wanted to do that. And he came out and lip synced.
Blues and Haas flat.
Yeah, Blues and Haas Flat. And he lip synced to that and did a heck of a job. Great act. People loved it. Okay. By the way, bows is dun da 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 da. That's bows. Okay. And that's also in the files someplace. And the band used to be kind of a pride with them. They can tell you. I never counted it off. because they knew the tempo, and I wanted it to happen as soon as the act ended. The vocal ended, I go, bang, and they play, right? That kept the show moving. It kept it going, and it helped them learn what a real show is like. You get out professionally, they're not going to kick it off for you. They're going to go, here it is, go. You know what the tempo is. Tempo is. Let's see if I've forgotten anything else. Please ask questions, I like them.
Bob,
Yeah,
do you remember in '65 doing the musical Horizons and Sing, Sing, Sing? And we got up and walked off the stage when Dick Devine was playing, and we went and sat in the band room.
I've used that bit quite a bit.
We went to McDonald's one time while he was still playing.
Yeah. You know this tune, Sing, 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 a lot of it. And the drum solo is actually only about, 8 bars, I think. We just said go. And we decided that wouldn't it be fun on Musical Horizons? And I don't think we told Dick.
No, we didn't.
We were just going to leave. And everybody got up and left the stage. And here's Dick playing away. And we left him playing. And he knew when I walked back in that, it was going to happen. So he went back to time and we went on with the number. But yeah, that worked very well. Thank you. I had forgotten about that. Let me see if I have anything else here I've forgotten for 68. Girls, stage band, strings. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. It was about that time, right around then, 68, that we were being asked to do some things outside the city of Cuyahoga Falls. So I went to the superintendent and I said, any chance we could get a bus? Otterbein College would like us to come down and play a dance. And he said, well, I guess so. When do you want it? And I said, well, the dance is Saturday night. We'd like to go Saturday, play the dance, and they're going to put us up in dorm rooms overnight and come back Sunday. And he said, no, wait a minute. Remember Sunday, I'm not sure. So he asked the Board of Education, and they gave a special dispensation to come back on Sunday if I promised to tell all the kids they're supposed to go to church as soon as they get back. So anyhow, we did that. We went to Otterbein and played, and it went very, very well. A couple little incidents happened, which I won't get into now unless somebody brings it up. Then I had a friend by the name of Mark Nyman, who in the early 60s was band director at Medina. He had graduated from Akron U. And then he became, what do you call it, supervisor of the whole county, Medina County. So he came to see me and he said, I'd like you to bring your band over to Medina. And I said, sure. Where? And he said, well, I'd like you to start at the high school, but then I want you to do every school in Medina County.
This is the Goldtones?
The Goldtones. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, I'll send a bus for you. And he did. And we went into every school and did a school assembly. Every school in Medina County. We did that for about a week. Yeah, that was quite a time, I'll tell you. That was in late 60s, late 60s. Yeah. Yeah, late, I think it was late 60s. What year did you get there?
66 to 69.
Well, it was right around that time, either that or 70. It was right around there. Yeah, because it was not in the later 70s or middle. We were doing other things then. But we did that, and let's see, what else did we have going there? Oh yeah, that's when all the festivals started. Ohio State finally started to have a jazz festival, and we did that. Then Tri-C put theirs together, and we did that one. Then North Canton, early 70s, I think, right around there, started there. But theirs was a contest. I don't know whether you remember that or not. They had a contest, and all the high school bands that were interested would come, and you played 3 numbers. You had 3 judges in the first, second, third, so on. If you won, then you got, I don't know what you call it, money to spend at Pellegrino's music store. Okay. We lost it the first year, and we won it the next 16 in a row.
Wow.
And the 16th year qualified us to go to the Mideast in Pennsylvania. I think I'm getting ahead a little bit. Let's see, use the strings. We better do this one first, and then I'll get to that. Right around the early 70s, I decided that I wanted the kids in the band to really hear what real big bands sounded like. The real stuff, not just recordings, but really see and hear the bands. So I had worked for Civic Music on a committee for acts and met a man from New York called Willard Alexander. He owned an agency. And he called me up one day and he said, Bob, he said, I know you're into big bands. Would you be interested in having Count Basie come to your school? I said, I'd love it, but I can't afford that. He said, maybe you can. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Basie's been off for 2 weeks. Okay, take vacation. He has on Sunday night a performance at Cleveland Auditorium. He wants a warm-up job. He's got some new players that are joining the band. It turned out just one. Would you be interested? I said, oh, hit me with it. How much? $1,500. I said, sold. And that was the first big band, and we sold tickets and made enough money to afford the $1,500, and even had a little left over. Okay? But the nice thing was, they were there on the Saturday. I had the jazz symposium. And those guys were available for students to talk to run sectionals, to ask them about the road, when they were on the road, what it was like. It was the first one, and then almost every year or every other year after that, I had bands in. I had Maynard Ferguson, I had Woody Herman, I had Les Brown. My mind is forgetting, but there were more, okay? And I would bring them in and ask them if they would run sectionals with the students. And the directors would meet down in the teacher's lounge with Basie or Herman or Maynard Ferguson. The funny one was Ferguson. I don't know how many of you know Ferguson's background, but Maynard was a high trumpet player. He could really play up there when he was with Stan Kenton. And he broke a blood vessel in his neck. He couldn't play trumpet anymore. So he went to England and played bell trombone. And Willard Alexander called me and they said, Maynard is coming back to the United States and he's going to bring his all-English band. And at that point in time, nobody in the United States knew who Maynard Ferguson was. I mentioned it to the kids in the band, they didn't know. Because he had been out of the scene with Kenton long enough that nobody knew. So I kind of explained to him, played a couple recordings, and he brought this all-English band in, and they were incredible. You had bassoon, jazz bassoon solos, jazz oboe solos. It was an incredible band. It only lasted 2 weeks because they had green card, and it only lasted 2 weeks. We were their first stop in the United States. And they went, did the rest of the tour, and went back. And then's when he put together that small band that he had, that he made all those recordings with. And he was back playing trumpet again by that time. But the funny part was, the day I brought him in, they come in the band room. I always gave him the band room. Here it is, make it your home. No problem. Jazz Symposium ends. Band is leaving by, have a nice trip. I go in the band room to clean up. There's schnapps bottles all over the band. So I spent a couple hours cleaning up the band room before the students got there the next morning. But some strange ones happened. Basie, he never wanted to say a thing. We took him down to the teacher's lounge, and the directors would say, well, no, how do you enjoy being on the road? All right. You like this band that you got now? Okay. How do you like this new player? He does okay. That was basic. He never had much to say. The new player that night that they played, they started out with an arrangement that I'm sure probably Cuyahoga Falls had played in a lot of other bands. All of Me. Okay? And he threw that out first thing. And the band played it, and about halfway through comes the tenor solo. And it's the new guy in the band. And he turned it over to him and just listened, and it was Sal Nestico. It was the new guy with the band. No relation to Sammy. But Sal Nestico, fantastic tenor. And he went on for about 20 minutes. The band finished the first number, and Basie's sitting there, and he says, I think I'll keep him. So strange things happen. Am I missing any recordings?
Not yet.
I got that one. Oh yeah, how about, did you have a picture of Irby Green?
Yes.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Another one that I brought in, and some of you probably performed with him and knew him, Irby Green.
Yeah.
Okay. He was a phenomenal player.
One
You
second.
can barely see him.
Yeah.
Oh, that's bad too.
Yeah, it
We
is.
were in that band.
He's the one that's standing up towards the very left of the photo.
Oh, I know where he's at, because this was down in the pit. You're right here. No, that's no good. Do you have a recording of him?
I have a recording of him playing at Falls in '75.
Good, play that. You'll let me rest my throat.
The band featured Bruce Castorell at the piano, John Herman and Craig Daniels on tenor sax, Red.
Can't hear you. Not a real good recording.
From the Midwest Convention.
That would be better.
All right.
Play that one.
That's right.
Now I'll tell you a little story about Irby. I got him through the King Company up in Cleveland. There used to be, the King Company was in Euclid, I believe it was. And they called me and they said, are you interested in having any solos for the band? I said, certainly. He said, it won't cost you a dime, the company will pay for it. Then he gave me a list of names and I said, I'd like Irby Green. And so Irby came. I picked him up at the airport. John Rhodes was with me at that time. And John Rhodes had the symphony band warmed up on stage. And as we came into the school, I said, Irby, would you like some time to get warmed up and everything? He said, no. I said, he was just taking his horn out of the case. He said, go ahead, start it. The Haydn Horn Concerto. Cold, he picked it up and hit a double high D. cold, and that's the way the whole day went. The kids' mouths were on the floor. This guy had a phenomenal upper register, unbelievable, and very easy to work with. That tune that was really bad was Ana Luisa.
No, that was not.
What was that?
That was a very precious one.
Oh yeah, very precious. That's off the same album. This is Ana Luisa.
This will be.
I told you.
Oh, this
That's Herbie in the high school trombone section. He played with the Goldtones twice, 73, 75?
73, 74, and 75, 76.
Okay. 73 and 74 were at Falls Auditorium. And we had done pretty well in a couple other contests we entered. And we were asked to perform at the Midwest in Chicago. And the Midwest said, well, you decide who you'd like as a guest soloist. It's our treat, we'll pay for it. So I called Herbie. And I said, like you to be with us in Chicago. He said, I'd love it. I said, well, what do you want to play? And he said, well, I have a new album coming out called, and I hope I'm right, Herbie Green's Big Beautiful Band. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. And those two tunes were on that album. Ana Luisa, what was the other one?
And a very precious love.
Yeah, Very Precious Love. And he sent me the album and he said, listen to it and see what you think. And I listened to it, and Scott Garlock was in the band. Scott was playing lead trombone. And I said, what do you think, Scott? And he just kind of shook his head. He said, you realize that I have to start on the double high D? Because
boy.
Herbie was playing the F above that. And I said, well, you want to give it a shot? And he said, yeah, let's do it. So we played 2 cuts right off that album in Chicago. And it was quite a thrill to have him there. He was really something else. Yeah. Better have some lights here, because there's a couple other things I want to hit, and I'm probably going to run over. Anybody have any questions?
Now, did he give you the charts for those 2 tunes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He sent me the charts. The same thing when we worked with Sammy Nestica. Well, I guess I didn't tell you about that. We were asked to play at the state convention down in Cincinnati. And again, they asked me who I'd like as the guest artist. And I was a fan of Sammy's since day one, and I said, I'd like Sammy Nestica. They said, fine. So I called him, and he said, yeah, I'd love to do it. He said, but I don't want to just send you one of my charts. He said, I want to write a new one for you. And I said, okay. I said, now remember, these are high school kids. I'd like to have a couple weeks anyhow ahead of time. Week ahead, no chart. 4 days ahead. So I got to school that morning and I said, oh God, I got a call. So I called around 7 o'clock in the morning. You know what time that is in California? So I call, he answers, and right then it hit me what time it was, and I go, "Oh, Sammy, I'm sorry." He said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "I've been up all night." He said, "I wrote that chart and I hated it and I tore it up and I just wrote a new one. I'll fix it to you. You'll have it tomorrow." And he sent the chart. And it is published, and I forget the name of it. It's one of the later ones he did. It might be in the Falls Library. But we played that. And he also did Moat and Swing that he had written. And I'm trying to think. He did a third one with the band.
I know, at least at the 85 Horizons, Goldtones did Pressure Cooker.
No, that was not done down there. I used that as an opener for Musical Horizons. But he was, God love him, he was a wonderful man. He met us the first time at the rehearsal down in Cincinnati. Okay, he had the music prepared. He came in, and he said, "I want to thank you." Cool. He said, "I want to thank you for playing my music." He said, "Not many people play my music anymore. I want to thank you." And that's the way he started the rehearsal, and every other second he was thanking somebody in the band for something. The lead trumpet player, he played that figure just right. Thank you. And then the drummer. He was quite a gentleman. I really loved him to death. He was such a prolific writer. He wrote for everybody you can think of. Frank Sinatra. He wrote for Barbra Streisand. Now you don't see his name on a lot of those records because he was a ghostwriter. That means he wrote the arrangement, but somebody else got to put their name on it. And the guy who a lot of times put his name on it, believe it or not, was Quincy Jones. Quincy used to hire Sammy as his ghostwriter to write the arrangements because he was so busy. Quincy had numerous things to do. And I'm running way over, aren't I? I better hit these real quick. In 1968 is when things started to happen in the colleges. At Kent, they had the band with Bill Dobbins, still not recognized. 70, still not recognized. I started the band myself at Akron U in 68. I did it for a couple years, turned it over to Jacobois, who ran it, I think, 1 year.
I got out
And then Roland Paluch came in. And Roland ran it till Jack Shantz has taken it over. Okay? But that's the history of Akron U. Now, Kent, we had a band way back in 51, but again, it was one of those go to the custodian, will you let us in the back door so we can practice? And it wasn't recognized until Chaz Baker took it over, and I think that was sometime in the 70s, and I can't give you a date. When I went back to work on my doctorate in 85, he was just getting his master's. And he had to get the master's if he wanted to keep the jazz program at Kent. And he took that over, and then that started to go. At Youngstown, Tony Leonardi, that started to explode. Ohio State started to go. That was the beginning of it, really. 68 to 70, things started to happen. Before that, we were one of the first, I'll call it, jazz ensemble in this part of the country. There were very, very few. I had trouble with the first festival I put together. There weren't enough bands. I called schools all over the state. Don't have a jazz band. What is it? You know, can we start one? And finally then, by about 68 to 70, there started to be quite a few around. Let me see if there's anything else I haven't hit here. The National Convention. Oh yeah. Mike Corbacero joined me at the high school in the 70s. Okay? And great addition. I had known Mike since Kent State. He went to Kent State after me. He's about 4 years younger. But he was teaching, and I was directing, believe it or not, the Falls Community Band at that time. Okay? We met out of Bowling. And Mike was playing trombone in that band. And we had an opening, and I said, Mike, you gotta come to Falls. And he came to Cuyahoga Falls, and then when I got an opening at the high school, I said, Mike, you gotta come up. John Rhodes had left. You gotta come up and join me at the high school. Well, we did contests for a few years, and then Mike and I got together, and we said, you know what? We've been doing contests so long, kids are getting tired of them. I'm getting tired of them. Why don't we do something for the kids that they'll enjoy? So we started to do concerts, how shall I put this, reciprocal. We found a band in New York. We said, you come to Falls and play a concert, and we'll come to your school and play a concert. We did that in New York. Then Canada. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's on the west side of Toronto. I'll think of it in a minute. What was it?
Hamilton?
No, not Hamilton. That was the other direction. Anyhow, he came down, played a concert, and we went up there and played a concert. Then we did it down in Cincinnati, at Montgomery, Ohio, and several other places. The one in Canada, and the students will get a kick out of this because they probably know this name. We pulled up at the high school, and the band director met us. Okay, got the Goldtones, symphony band was along. We got out, he said, you're just in time for lunch. Kids said, oh, great, great, sounds good. Started in the school, we hear piano, jazz piano. What's this? Go in, there's a guy playing piano. I said, what's going on? He said, oh, it's a local guy, Oscar Peterson. It's a local guy. And he was. He lived about 4 houses down from the high school. And he came in and for nothing played for the students at lunch. Yeah, strange things. Let's see what else here I've got. You heard that, you heard that. We did play also in '75 for the ASPDA. Anybody know what that is? No?
Band directors.
American School Band Directors. It's an organization from all over the United States, the top band directors for the country. Very selective. You have to have taught 7 years and be voted on by 100% of the members to get in. They had a national convention, again, in Cincinnati, and we got invited to play. And that was really a great thrill for the students as well as the parents and the kids. It really was something else. Let's see. Oh, I didn't mention the Mideast as far as going. I told you we won North Canton 16 years in a row. That invited us to go to Pennsylvania, to the Mid-East, big convention like the Midwest. All these stage bands from all of the eastern United States played. You got to play 3 numbers. Barry Hartz was in the band that year. And we won it. We actually won it. It was quite a thrill. They put us up, we had a hotel. I think parents took care of that, didn't they? I believe, yeah. But it was something else. Barry played an alto solo that Rich Shanklin had written. And I'm trying to remember the name of it, and I can't right now. But it started out, and this will interest, students should interest this. He had to improvise with just the bass player for the first 32 bars. Okay, bass player's playing a walking bass line and he's improvising. Then finally the rest of the band comes in. One heck of a performance. I think that's what won it for us, to be honest with you. I talked to Barry about it and he thought the same thing. Yeah. Now, any other questions? I don't want to keep you forever. I've gone on a lot longer than I ever thought I would. Any questions? Oh, you had one last recording.
Yes, the last
Tell me about it. By the way, before I forget, this guy, he deserves a big round of applause. He has done so much for the alumni and the music program. I first met you, I guess you were in the trumpet section.
Yes, Musical Horizons my senior year.
Yes, right. And I was lucky enough, they asked me to come in and work a little bit on a number that Rusty was going to play. And I met you in the trumpet section, and he's been doing all this work ever since then. Just marvelous. I don't know where he gets all this stuff. I really don't. If any of you have anything like that, historical, that has to do with either the marching band or any of the things up at Falls High, please contact Tanner and let him know, because he's keeping track of all that. Now tell him about the recording.
All right, I have two last recordings to play tonight. One would be when Rusty Higgins came back to Falls High School for the 55th Musical Horizons. In 2016, he came, directed by Mr. Feldbush. He came and played Rusty Blue one more time with the Goldtones.
Yeah. You remember that? Yeah. Yeah, I wrote that for Rusty when he was a senior in high school. Obviously a blues.
This is the 2016 version. The problem is this is just a board recording, and the only mics they had were bass, piano, bass,
If you want to hear a good recording of Rusty Higgins, go on Facebook, look up the tune My Romance, put Rusty Higgins / My Romance, you'll hear a solo you won't believe. I mean, he's with Tom Kubis's big band that night. It's in a club. And that solo is incredible. My Romance / or Rusty Higgins / My Romance. Yeah, I went back and listened to it just the other day, just to make sure that I wasn't going completely crazy. I also want to thank Mark back here, Mark Bowers, president of the online. And last but not least, the Historical Society. Thank you so much.
I, like Mr. Feldbush said, Tanner's just been wonderful, putting all of Mr. Feldbush's career on digital and this type of thing. It's available at the museum. And he's just been such a wonder for us to, you know, bring us all together. And they make a great duo, don't they? Goldtones are here tonight. They're a former. Oh, that's terrific. How wonderful. Any questions?
You got questions, ask away, yeah.
During the Musical Horizon show, would you have a tune during the show where you'd let the kids improvise?
Eventually, yes. I might as well take the time to tell you about that. Another of the things that I wanted to do to prepare them to be professional players. First academic course I put in was music theory. Then I did music history. Then I did music improv. Then I put arranging and composition. For about the first 5 maybe years, no, not much improvising. But by the time we got in the late 60s, all through the 70s, sure. Yeah. There were, what they do, they give you a suggested solo with the chord symbols. Do what you want. If you weren't able to improvise, you play the solo you wrote. Maybe change it to fit you. If you could, use the chord symbols. And we always gave them a chance to do that if they wanted to do it. But it really took the improv course to bring it to light. Now, a lot of those people that were in that first course are now playing all over the place. Mark Early in Boston, Mark Woltman in New York, Bob Benora in Vegas, Nate Benora in Virginia someplace, I forget where it's at now. They're all over and using a lot of the stuff. Sam Ryan, you forgot Sam. Scott Garlock. Yeah. Dave Banks.
Greg Van Boven.
Greg Van Boven. Yeah. I had a couple that were really great, but kind of screwed up.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. No. I'm talking about a player I had, a trumpet player that was phenomenal, but didn't end up so good. Okay. He got into drugs after he left school. And I went to see him play because they usually asked me to come and hear him play. So I went out to hear him play, and this was in Toledo at a Holiday Inn. It was a state convention, and Jack Boyce went with me. And we went to the club, and here's this young man standing up there playing. And I told Dick who it was. He said, "Oh, yeah." So we went up on the first break. He was so out of it, he didn't even know who I was.
Oh, no.
Had no idea. And I had him for 4 years. Just no clue. The other one, well, I can tell you that story because he was really a fine percussionist. Bill Smith. Okay. You remember Bill, this is a wild story. We had Basie at Falls. I played all of those arrangements that Sammy wrote for the Basie band. Basie came to E.J. Thomas, and they got on the microphone just before the show started, and they said, "Our drummer is not here yet. Are there any drummers in the audience?" And Bill about jumped 12 feet high. Here I am. He actually got to play with the Basie band for 3 numbers, and did very well because we had played those arrangements at Falls. The actual arrangements they played. But then I used to go in the mornings. I'm taking all this time. To Round the Clock, which was a 24-hour restaurant. State Road. I used to get in there about 6 o'clock. They would pour coffee down me, shove me out the door at 7 to go to school. And one morning I'm there drinking coffee, and I hear a voice, "Hey, Mr. Feldbush." And I turn around, and it's Bill Smith. Now, Bill had been out of school at least 4, maybe 5 years. And there's this 13-year-old girl with him who looked about this big. And Bill says, "You going to come hear me play?" And I said, "Sure, Bill. Where are you playing?" "At the Green Apple."
Yeah.
Anybody, you remember that?
I remember.
It
We'd
was a
go
rock
dance.
and roll place out on State Road. So I figured it's going to be a rock and roll band. I
Right.
walk in, and this record is playing, and here's Bill Smith sitting all by himself with the drum set, gold lame jumpsuit on,
Yeah.
open clear down to
Big
here,
apple.
playing drums to a record,
Yeah.
rock and roll. And he was one heck of a drummer.
Mhm.
He was really a great drummer. But that's what I meant when I said some of them sometimes don't turn out so well. But those are the only two that I remember very vividly not turning out so well. Any other questions? All good questions, yeah.
I got a question. I go into Stutzman's a lot, and they've since torn it down because Giant Eagle wanted their liquor license.
Right,
So Dave Marconi ran that place.
right.
And I used to brag about what a trumpet player I was. He says, "You're nothing." I was Mr. Feldbush's first trumpet player in '61. Is that true? Boy, he must have been a real good player.
He was also quarterback on the football team. You ask him.
All right, I will.
Thanks, Sheldon.
Well, he never marched in a marching band. He played on the football team. But boy, right after the football season was over, he came and played. Yeah, he was. He was my lead trumpet player.
Funny.
Dave Marconi. Yeah. Yeah. Fine trumpet player. Yeah, one of those trombone players in the first band, Niels Christensen, went on and played in the Ohio State Marching Band. He was one of the first students we ever had from Falls that played in the Ohio State Marching Band. No question.
Did you ever have any recordings of the High Steppers?
No, I did not.
Love to hear that.
I would too. It's been a long time.
This young man said there's one on YouTube.
There's
Tanner
a,
uploaded that.
there is a film of the High Steppers. on
Oh, a
YouTube.
film, yeah. Is there no sound?
Yeah, it's a home.
Sure. Yeah, it was a nice group. Go ahead, show them the film if you want.
Yeah, it was an elite drum and brass
You
corps.
can dig it up.
Rick Spicer
You know,
was
when
in
we
it
marched down
for
Kirby
those hot times.
Oh, yeah,
doing that song downtown,
yeah,
I thought it was gonna fall on my head.
yeah.
Can you explain what the High Steppers was?
Oh, the High Steppers, I'm sorry. About 1961, the father of one of the drummers in the band, Hotchkiss, funny I remember these names, but he came to see me and he said, Chuck Hotchkiss, yeah. And he said, we have this group over in Akron that meets at the Goodyear Hall of kids from all the high schools in Akron. It's a band, and we need a director. And we have a group of majorettes, and we have some flags. And I said, well, I'll come over and listen to them. And I went over and listened to them and stayed for 9 years. And it was a group, we did parades in the summer, all over the state of Ohio. In 9 years, they won 108 trophies. Yeah. And I don't know where they're at. I don't know. Yeah. They won 108. They wore, well, if he's got it, they wore striped trousers, I forget, red jackets?
Red and white.
Red and
striped
white,
jacket.
and then straw hats.
Yeah.
And the band did dance steps and fancy footwork and played swing music. The majorettes twirled and danced, flags danced, and we went all over the place. I can't even tell you where they all were. I don't remember. Been too long. Go ahead.
Trying the internet's not cooperative.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Any other questions? What's that?
When did you have free time?
I didn't. That's the reason it only lasted 9 years. And that's why I only stayed with Akron U for 2. I went back later. I spent 3 times there. No, 4 times there. But I only stayed for 2 years. I just didn't have time. It's by then the marching band was traveling, and we were doing a lot of shows there. The Goldtones were getting more popular, and we were doing shows, so I just didn't have the time. But I lived my job. To me, teaching was not a job. It was a way of life. It was my whole life, and always will be. That's just the way it is. You find it? No.
Now the internet's not working.
Okay. Enough. You've heard enough. Yeah.
Was there a set period during the day when the Goldtones practiced, or did they have to go after school?
That's a good question. I went after school for a reason. If you went in school, then they had to have a period where they were free enough to take that class. And you couldn't get the players you wanted. So I went after school. We had 1 full rehearsal a week, and every section had a rehearsal. So you got like a trumpet sectional rehearsal and a full rehearsal every week, till we got to about 2 weeks before Musical Horizons, and we went every day, sometimes twice a day, maybe even 3 times a day, until the show was up. Yeah. And then the funny thing, and I get kidded about this all the time, tell them what happened snow days.
We rehearsed.
We rehearsed.
Hey, what?
It didn't matter. They got there, didn't they? Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
ever have a female vocalist go professional?
That's a good question.
Carla McClellan.
What's that?
Carla McClellan?
Yes, Carla, right. McClenny, yeah. I'd forgotten about her.
Cheryl Lantry played out a lot.
She does quite a bit, yeah. Now her first name was Cheryl Shabenik. Cheryl does a lot of professional singing with her husband, Phil Lantry. Those are the only ones I can think of right now. Any other questions? Ask, yeah?
The co-directors that helped you with the marching band, like Gary Yutz and Chris DeMarco, did they help you with the Goldtones and the concert band?
They had their own concert band, because at that time when I left, we had 4 concert bands and 4 jazz ensembles at the high school. So they would do one of the other jazz ensembles and one of the other concert bands. But yes, I was never afraid to have people come in and hear the band and help. Never. If somebody could give me help and listen to my band and have constructive comments to make, hey, come on in. I'd be glad to have you come in. So that never bothered me. So I would have people in quite often and come in and listen to the band. But no, I did not have an assistant director, no. The only band I had an assistant with was the marching band. And that was more co-directors than assistant.
Yeah.
And for the first 2 years after I took the band over myself, I didn't have anybody. It was just me. And I never got paid a stipend for the marching band until my 5th year at Cuyahoga Falls. Never made a dime. And finally the superintendent called me and he said, I think we ought to pay you something. I said, thanks.
That was about $3,600.
Huh?
That was about $3,600, wasn't it, a year?
That was my first salary, yes. Yes, sir. When I first signed my first contract, it was $3,600, right. And it gradually went up when I finished teaching. My wife knows this story. When I retired, I went to see my brother, and one of his sons had just gotten married, and his wife was a teacher in the Chicago area. She started out $5,000 higher than I quit at. And I had over a master's at that time. I was about 30 hours over a master's. I made $35,000. She started at 40. So that tells you what time, how it changes. Any other questions? Be glad to answer them, if I know them.
Were there any outstanding years that you felt you had some of the best talent?
The library will close in
1965.
We think it's left.
If I answer that, I'm really going to make a lot of it.
Some enemies.
Now, I had a lot of good bands over the years, okay? I like to think that the 60s paved the way for all those awards we got in the 70s, okay? The 60s did the hard work, and the 70s got the rewards.
It was like that in the marching band too.
It was. It was.
How do you feel the talent in Northeast Ohio stacked up against nationally?
Very, very well. Now, any of you that know too much about the big bands know that the big bands came through this area. Okay, they would start in Youngstown or Pittsburgh, Youngstown, come over to Canton, go down to Myers Lake, go out to West Akron, go up to Toledo, and finally on up to Chicago. That was the route they took. And they would always pick up musicians around this area, because you always had guys getting sick or leaving the band, and you're looking for somebody, so you say, hey, do you know anybody? Yeah, John went to school with me, he's over here in Cuyahoga Falls, how about calling him? And that's the way they got their players. But yeah, a lot of good players from here. I think she wants to close up.
Not me, the library does.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.